Well, talking about trade and chips, you got to talk about China. Trade tensions with China rise as the U.S. considers blacklisting up to 5 Chinese video surveillance companies. Now, less than a week ago, the Trump administration barred U.S. companies from supplying Huawei technologies, as we've been discussing. Joining us now with what else is on the table is Yahoo Finance's Aikiko Fujita, who has the latest for us. These 5 companies, do we know them here in the States?
Well, Hikvision is one name that's been singled out, but I want to point to a statement that's come out from China's foreign ministry overnight on the back of those reports that the U.S. could potentially be adding some surveillance companies to the entity list. A spokesperson at the foreign ministry saying China opposes the U.S. smearing and suppressing companies from other countries, including China, by abuse of state power. Now, if the Commerce Department here in the U.S. decides to add some of these names to the list, it would certainly escalate tensions, especially given that China's ambitions in this space. They are already the largest market for security and surveillance technology, and China has ambitions to become the top exporter of this technology globally. And I want to point you to this chart here coming in from CB Insights because it shows you just how much China has poured money into this space and facial recognition technology. $1.6 billion in private funding poured into this space. Now, let's talk about this company, Hikvision, because we did see shares of that company really plummet in China trade on the back of these reports. This is one of the largest manufacturers of video surveillance cameras and security products that are powered by artificial intelligence. And they have faced international criticism from human rights groups who accuse the company of facilitating the persecution of Uyghurs in the western region of Xinjiang. And we are talking about a Muslim ethnic minority that has been persecuted by Beijing, the UN estimating up to 1 million Uyghurs are now placed in detention centers in Xinjiang. Now, Republican senators like Marco Rubio have already been pressuring the administration to sanction not just Hikvision, but some of these other companies on the back of human rights violations. But there are also concerns that the export of these surveillance cameras could lead to Chinese espionage globally, because there are already a handful of countries like Ecuador, like Pakistan, that's already using this technology. Any restriction on Hikvision would be similar to what we've seen from Huawei. So American suppliers essentially not being able to sell to Hikvision some of the components that are made here in the U.S. And one more thing to note here, we are starting to see the squeeze on Huawei here in the U.S. have implications overseas as well. We did get reports mobile carriers in Japan and the U.K. have now suspended the launch of new Huawei devices over concerns that export controls here will affect the phone's performance abroad.
Aikiko, thank you. We're going to break this down with the panel. David, there's a lot to digest here, and there was a comment, I believe, from state press in China coming from the Communist Party about a new long march, and some people are interpreting that as perhaps indication that the Chinese are hunkering down for a protracted trade war. What worries you about this?
I think we have to get used to the fact that this is very likely going to go on for some time. As Americans, we have a lot of resolve until it starts hitting our paycheck and our lifestyle. I actually think this particular incident and the way they're handling it is actually a smart move by the administration, because they're bringing in human rights. That's going to have a lot of broad-based appeal, especially in Congress. So this may be one thing that both sides of the aisle support.
It's been kind of shocking that whole situation has been ignored up until now.
It is, and it happens on a worldwide scale. And this is the fear of AI, and some of these gets in the hands of a non-benevolent government.
Right.
What can they do? And
that's
I think we should all be fearful of it.
Yeah, that's a drum that George Soros has been beating, actually.
Scott?
Yeah, I think the retaliation that China could kind of come up with is pretty scary. I mean, that Goldman Sachs note this morning saying that if China bans Apple products in China, that could lead to a 30% drop in Apple's earnings. I don't know what benefit China would get out of doing such a thing. I don't think that could necessarily happen.
Long term, they hurt themselves.
But we know the implications of Apple stock on U.S. markets. If you own an S&P 500 ETF, 25% of that is in Apple stock alone. So I don't know if Apple can necessarily handle any more downside risk in China. And we know what is the Apple of China? Huawei.
Well, what about the sale of rare earth minerals? I mean, that would really impact.
That's an
And
attack.
you saw Xi Jinping visit one of those mines the other day, and that kind of fueled speculation that, hey, maybe this is on the table of China limiting their exports
That's maybe a
of
very
rare
valuable
earth metals.
That's
to
maybe a
the
very
US.
valuable weapon for them because that's something that only they have. But in terms of trade overall, I'm not that concerned because eventually commerce goes on. You know, the supply chains will move. They'll move from China. They'll move to Vietnam. Countries like Vietnam will be direct beneficiaries of that. Over time, we'll get through that. But that's a particular weapon that we can't produce anywhere.
There used to be a mine, rare earth mineral mine out west that's now closed. But
why?
Could we? Well, it's because the Chinese control the rare earth minerals globally. But could
Let's
we,
open
could
it.
we reopen it? Okay.
By the way, there's an ETF that tracks companies in the rare earth metal space. It's ticker REMX. It's down about 2.5% today. So folks are playing this space as well.